thank you for that being here. Look at how little that one is. Ooh. Now, it's interesting because what many people do is they join a family surrogate based on their pathology. I mean, overeaters. Now, I'm an overeater. I could join a club. And we could come together and we would feel better because we would realize that we were all stuck in this same boat of overeating. And we'd each give testimonials. But then you look at the economic realities. Have you noticed lately there are an awful lot of have-nots for the number of haves in the world? Have you noticed that it's increasing, the discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots? That as the multinationals, as it all works, more and more money is concentrated in fewer and fewer people's hands, and more use of resources is concentrated in fewer and fewer people's hands. In our culture and around the world, there are more people in poverty than not in poverty, by far. In neither of the texts that come from the Republic or come through the Bible do either of those approve of any kind of social structure in which there is a large discrepancy between the rich and the poor. So in a way, we've cut ourselves off from our mythic sources in order to live in this world of individualism, progress, modernity, in which the individual over all. I mean, I hate to share with you, but it is true that one of the mythic figures of this culture is Donald Trump. I mean, you may feel uncomfortable about that, but he is still one of the mythic figures. Somehow when I watch that, I suspect it's a little like those tribes where they would take a maiden and honor her for a year and then boil her or stab her or something. We sacrifice people into our myths. I mean, poor Donald Trump, I mean, it's not him. He's just caught in a myth, which he thinks is real. And that's suffering. That's suffering. I'll tell you, as that polarization gets greater, the stability gets less and less. Because the have-nots aren't waiting indefinitely for the altruistic trickle-down effect that President Reagan promised us. Now, in the business community, there is some process that goes on, which we're going to explore a little bit, that often it is only some traumatic event, such as illness, such as a child's breakdown or a child's acting out, such as the moments of retirement, such as bankruptcy, such as some intense crisis like that, that forces an awakening, that forces a person to confront how they lock step into a game. And the interesting question is, are there subtler motivators for that self-examination? We're talking about stages of the evolution of consciousness of individuals, and we're asking now whether built into the business process, the process of being entrepreneurial or being in management or being involved in the business mode, whether there are clues along the way that one tends to ignore because they are subtle and because one feels somehow that those clues are showing a weakness in yourself rather than clues that reflect something that if you listen to might be the cue for you to consider that there's another way of you looking at the meaning of your life and why you're doing what you're doing. I remember a stage in my father's life where my father, who had been, he had been a successful lawyer. He helped start a university, Brandeis. He had been president of a railroad. He had, from the culture's point of view, been a success. But as he retired and turned to his hobbies, then there came a period where at night he would wake up remembering all his failures, remembering the investments he didn't make, remembering the bad investments he made, and the feelings of failure. And I thought, is that what the product of all of his efforts are? That's what he's left with, is this feeling of failure. He's gone beyond that now, and he's just in total peace now, but he's also very quiet. And I just know really from, like in the old days when my father was chairman of the Brandeis and head of the Joint Distribution Committee and Jewish Charities, I used to play gin rummy with his rich friends. And we'd play on somebody's yacht in Miami. And I'd meet a man who was in his 70s, whose company was on the New York Exchange, and he had just moved all his mills from the New England area to the Tennessee area. And he was in his 70s, and he was complaining and such headaches, and he had many millions of dollars. And I said to him, why did you do it? Why do you keep doing it? And he looked up at me with what looked, from my point of view, like almost a sadness, and he said, what else am I going to do? And I felt at that point the pain of getting locked into a game, a model of oneself that you couldn't transcend because the reinforcers were too strong for staying in the thing. So what I want to look at is some of the subtle, not so subtle, things that are clues in business life that might resonate for you, and if they don't, fine. You are probably well beyond them, or you may be still not realizing them. Who knows? We'll allow for both possibilities.
And you don't just say it's the body, not the mind, or the body's the most important. Forget most important anymore. These are just interactive processes. And you get at them different ways. So I said we've gone from individualism to a beginning sense of the common good, of the recognition we are part of systems. It's been in the scientific and philosophical literature. I mean, it's Bateson, it's all these people. But that we could collectively, I mean, if you think of the collective, the German collective consciousness that dealt with through much denial what was being done to the Jews and others, is that different from our collective denial that allowed us to idolize and place on our altars people like Donald Trump when we knew that the permanent underclass was being created because we could see it around us, but we were busy denying what we were seeing. We had Dynasty and we had Dallas. And then we had an increasing number of people who are the ocean that spreads out into the world over that Mexican border and elsewhere, of those who haven't. And how much denial, how much closing of your compassionate heart must it take to continue to play the game of King of the Mountain, what's in it for me? And each of us gets the most we can for ourselves. Trickling down, of course, is the assumption that once we have enough for ourselves, we will then create ways to share it with everybody. out of our beneficence, or out of our obligation, perhaps. That's another level of consciousness. And it's why Chuck's involvement with Social Venture Network, his creation of it, is an absolutely exquisite moment of shifting mythology. That Ben and Jerry and Anita Roddick, Wayne Selby from Calvert Fund, and all these wonderful people who are playing with the edge of saying, business has a social responsibility for the common good. Wait until television gets that kind of group going. I think we're in an interesting transition period because of the bomb from the myth that war is a solution, a political solution, to recognizing that it is not. That diplomacy is the only strategy. And that unless you have a win-win situation, nobody wins. We're seeing how when somebody wins, somebody loses, and when somebody loses, there they are, the Croats, the Serbs, and the Bosnians. Everybody feels they lost, and now they're going to win. But really, in history, there can be no winners and losers, because we're all in it together. But notice how little compassion there is across those borders between the Muslims and the Christians, the Jews and the Arabs, the Palestinians, the inner city and the suburbs. We had an interesting myth that I had in my history books about 1492 and the great benefit of Columbus discovering America. I think we have matured with our mythic structures. I now feel that we are looking for a way to make an apology for the fact that we built our system on genocide. And we are as culpable as Hitler ever was for what we have done as a people. And feel how deep the justifications were in the culture. John Wayne. This is an older one, but we had the myth that we were a moral force in the world. And then we had the Vietnam War, and we realized how fallible our systems were. That our fallible meaning that we were caught in acts that were not harmonious with our deepest wisdom. That's the pain of it. The pain for each of you is to be living your life in a way that is not harmonious with your deepest wisdom. And I would say that's my pain. And that ever since 1961, when I took mushrooms, ever since that moment, I have recognized that I have a deep, deep wisdom, a connection to the universe that is at home and true and at one. And that my separateness is just my separateness. And that the systems I am part of are fallible systems. And they are dissonant from the way my heart says. My heart says there is justice. My heart says there is compassion, because that is what my heart is. It's a just and compassionate entity, and so is yours. And we armor them with rationalization to deal with the fact that we are acting in ways that are not just and that are not compassionate. And I figure my whole life has been an attempt to work with the dissonance and the attempt to integrate my inner truth with the way I live. And it's very, very fascinating as a journey. Fascinating as a journey. But I remember sitting with Maharaji, and we were in Delhi, and he was lying on his tucket, his cot, blanket fallen off him. He doesn't have anything, he doesn't do anything. He's just there. Extraordinary, extraordinary being. And in the distance, we hear a huge parade going by, which has in it Indira Gandhi and her generals, and there are elephants and tanks. Major parade. Maharaji's lying there and he says, look at all that, and it's just a worldly king. It's just a worldly king.
The law that you appreciate as what you call God oftentimes is just all form in law. It's all lawfully related. It's called the Tao in Chinese, the way of things. It's the way in which all forms are related to all other forms. And you look and you see it's perfect. You can look in physics or chemistry or astronomy or astrology or psychology or music, or wherever you look, you begin to see that forms are related all to all other forms, all in lawful ways. It gets interesting when you get down to quarks and things like that, but everything above that, it looks pretty lawful. And there is an interesting term. When you look at the way in which those things are all lawfully related, you say, it's perfect. My guru in India used to say to me, Ramdas, don't you see it's all perfect? I'd say, perfect? Perfect? What about Bangladesh? What about Africa? What about tyranny? What about violence? What about greed? He said, don't you see it's all perfect? Can't you step back for a moment from your humanity to see the way of things? Can't you see the way it's all lawfully unfolding? The question is, have you the courage to see what you're seeing? Or does it seem to take away your humanity? Because when you look and you say it's all perfect, the problem is it's so impersonal. Somebody falls down in front of you and you say, karma. See, there's no warmth to it. But if you come down into your human heart, the pain is unbearable. Because there is so much suffering everywhere. And you look and there's rape, and there's child molestation, and there's ecological insensitivity, and there's tyranny, and there's terrorism, and there's... Which one is it first? Starvation, the homeless. Who is it? Where does your heart go first? And what most people do is they close their heart down and they armor it to protect it from the immense amount of suffering. They armor it with their mind, with thoughts, with a web or a net or a veil of thought that armors the heart so that they don't get hurt and overwhelmed by the immensity of the suffering. Because you know how when your child hurts, you give anything. And the quality of the heart is, the heart has no boundaries. My heart goes out to you is the expression. The heart will give. The heart doesn't know boundaries. The mind knows the boundaries. The heart says, here, take my automobile, take my apartment, take anything. And the mind saying, now wait a minute, be reasonable. And there is an interesting dialogue that goes on within us. And so this armoring protects not only our hearts from the amount of suffering outside, but it protects our separateness from our heart, which would give away our separateness. It would give away everything. Give away everything. And so the interesting question is, how do you keep your heart open in hell? And what does it mean to be in love with the world? And what does it mean in action? What do you do? The answer lies again in the statement, at least the answer that I have found thus far, that there's nowhere to stand. That if you stand only in your humanity, it's unbearable. If you stand in the area of perfection, it's impersonal. If you get them both going at once, it is the root of what I understand true compassion to be about. It is something where, unlike Job, which questions God at some point, you do what you do because your human heart hurts and you want to do what you can to relieve the suffering of the people you love. And at the same moment, there's not a flicker in you as to it is all as it must be. That's what's called faith, I guess, from one level, until it is what you are. I mean, I don't have to have faith that I can make a fist. I do, but I'm just making the fist.
at the level that that becomes real in the sense of you have grokked it, or you've become it, or you're one with it, that sense of oneness and perfection of form, at that point, there is no flicker